When people ask about my childhood, I don't hesitate to say I had a good one. I was loved, protected, and cherished. My parents always made sure I had what I needed. That's what parents are supposed to do, right? I'm Amanda, 30 years old, and until recently, I thought I understood my place in the world. But everything changed, and now I see things differently. Or at least, I see how they see me differently. Growing up, I was the center of my parents' universe. And why wouldn't I be? I was born fragile, coming into the world too soon, too weak. My mother told me countless times how scared she was, how she prayed over my incubator every night. My father said I was a miracle baby, and maybe that's why they treated me like I was something delicate, something precious. But looking back, I see now that it wasn't just about me. It was about her too. Deborah, my older sister, the one who always stood just outside the spotlight, watching, waiting, hoping. I remember her being around when I was little, but not in the way that really mattered. She was just there. Mom was always making sure I was okay. Was the room clean? Was I feeling warm enough? Had I taken my vitamins? And if Deborah coughed or sniffled, even once, she was sent away. I never questioned it. It made sense. I was the one who needed extra care. It wasn't my fault she wasn't as important. I can see now, in hindsight, that maybe she was trying. When I was little, she'd bring me drawings she made, or she'd sit by my bed and read to me, while Mom wiped down every surface with disinfectant. I don't remember if I ever thanked her. Probably not. I don't know when I realized that I could use my parents' devotion to my advantage. It wasn't some grand scheme. I wasn't plotting to push Deborah out of the way. It just happened. I'd be upset about something, and suddenly, my parents were there, bending over backward to fix it. If I cried because I couldn't find my favorite toy, Mom and Dad tore the house apart looking for it. If I had a bad day at school, they reassured me that I was perfect, that I didn't need to worry. And if Deborah did something good, won a competition, got good grades, whatever, I just had to feel a little left out. And suddenly, they were more focused on me again. It wasn't on purpose. Not really. Deborah tried so hard. She studied like crazy, joined clubs, and won awards. And yet, somehow, it never really mattered. If she tried to tell Mom and Dad about something exciting, they'd always get distracted. She'd stand there, holding up a trophy or a certificate, and I'd see the moment their attention shifted. Mom would check her phone. Dad would sigh and say, "That's nice, sweetie." And I didn't even have to try. By the time I was in middle school, I understood the power I had. If Deborah got praise, I didn't even need to fake being upset. I'd just casually mention how hard my homework was, or how a girl at school was being mean to me, and suddenly the conversation was about me again. I don't know if I did it because I needed the attention or because I just could. High school only made it worse. I was good at playing the part. I wasn't dumb, not by any means, but I didn't have to push myself. Why would I, when Deborah was doing all the work of making our family look good? She was the one with perfect grades, the one teachers raved about. And if I didn't put in the same effort, well, that was okay. My parents never pressured me the way they pressured her. They just wanted me to be happy. Meanwhile, Deborah was desperate for their approval, but she never quite got it. I can still remember the night she had that meeting with her teacher, the one where they told my parents she could get a full-ride scholarship. I barely listened. I was at home, sprawled on the couch, flipping through my phone, when I accidentally let it slip that I couldn't find my favorite pen. It was stupid. A pen. But the second my parents heard my voice break over the phone, they left her meeting. Just like that. I didn't even need the pen. I think that was the moment I realized it didn't matter what Deborah did. She could be the smartest, the hardest working, the most successful, and it still wouldn't change the way things were. When she got into college, I wasn't excited. I was relieved. I was finally going to have the house to myself. No more feeling like I had to compete for attention. No more worrying that maybe, just maybe, my parents would start noticing her more than me. And I was right. Once she left, I became their entire focus. It was just me, and I thrived in it. By the time I was in my last year of high school, I had them wrapped around my finger without even trying. If I didn't feel like going to school, I could convince Mom to let me stay home. If I wanted something expensive, I didn't even need to ask directly. I just had to mention how my friends all had it. And if Deborah ever came home from college for a visit, it was like she didn't exist. She stopped trying after a while. She'd sit through family dinners quietly, answering questions when asked, but never really engaging. I think, In some way, she had already given up. She knew there was no point in fighting for attention that would never be hers. And then, finally, she was gone, graduated, got a job, moved out. I barely thought about her. She was just Deborah, the older sister, who had never really mattered the way I did. And for years, I never questioned it. Why would I? Everything was perfect. At least, that's what I thought. Because the thing about standing at the center of your parents' universe, you never really consider what happens when the world shifts. And at Thanksgiving dinner, everything shifted. I just didn't know it yet. By the time I was in college, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mom and Dad still saw me as their pride and joy, their special daughter. They covered my tuition at Carleton University, a private school with a reputation that made them beam with pride whenever they talked about it. I loved Carleton, not just because of the academics, but because of what it represented. It was expensive, exclusive, full of people who had connections. It felt like proof that I was on a different level than Deborah, who had gone to a state school. But that's where the problem started. Carleton was full of wealthy students' real wealth. My Gucci-obsessed roommate, the girl in my finance class who vacationed in Monaco, the guy whose parents had buildings named after them. For the first time, I didn't feel special. I felt behind. These weren't people who had to check their bank balances before going on a weekend trip. They didn't have parents who signed over tuition payments. They had trust funds. They had private jets. They had lives that made mine feel small. And I hated it. I tried to keep up. The right clothes, the right makeup, the right social circles. But there was always something missing, some gap one couldn't quite close. My parents did their best. They took out loans, stretched their finances thin, and made sure I never felt like I was going without. But I could see the strain, the way they worried about money even as they told me not to. So I learned to play the game. When friends asked why I didn't have the latest designer handbag, I'd joke about being above materialism. When they talked about summering in Europe, I'd roll my eyes and say, long flights exhaust me. Like I had the option to go. It worked. Mostly. And then Deborah started sending money home. I didn't think much of it at first. Mom mentioned it offhandedly one evening. Your sister is helping us out a little. I should have been grateful, I guess. Should have thought, wow, that's really generous of her. But I didn't. Instead, I resented it. Because suddenly, the balance was shifting. Suddenly, Deborah, who had been the background character my whole life, was stepping into a role that had always been mine. The good daughter, the successful one, the one who helped the family. And that didn't sit right with me. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Just a little financial support, nothing more. But then came the small, insidious changes, like the way Mom started talking about her. Deborah was really thoughtful this month. Things would be so much harder without her. She arranged that catered meal for Thanksgiving. It was a huge help. Your sister is doing well. She's really responsible with money. It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. It was attention, and I noticed. The more Deborah sent, the more comfortable my parents seemed. Bills were covered. There was less stress, less sighing over money. And Amanda, the golden child, wasn't the one holding the family together anymore. She was. That should have been my wake-up call, but it wasn't. I was too busy focusing on myself, on Carleton, on my own struggles. Because here's the thing, while my parents were getting financial support, I wasn't. Not directly, anyway. My loans were stacking up. My expenses were adding up. I needed things to keep up appearances. I needed to fit in. And yet, when I mentioned it, when I hinted that maybe I could use some help too, Mom would sigh and say, "Your sister is already helping so much, sweetie." That's when the resentment started to fester. I didn't say anything, not outright, but it was there, crawling beneath my skin, whispering in my ear. Why is she getting all the credit? Why is she suddenly the responsible one? Why does she get to be the one saving the family while I struggle? I still had my pride, so I swallowed it down, ignored it, and focused on my own life. After all, once I graduated, things would change. I had connections. I had a degree from Carleton. The first was going to land a big job, make real money, and finally take my place where I belonged, where I'd always belonged, above Deborah. I was sure of it. But I was wrong. So wrong. Graduating from Carleton was supposed to be my moment. I had spent years watching rich kids land cushy jobs through their connections, fully expecting that I would be one of them. My parents had taken out loans for my education, and I had taken out loans too. but it was all going to be worth it, because I wasn't going to be just anyone. I was Amanda, the girl who had always gotten what she wanted, the star of the family. Or at least, that's what I thought. But reality hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. The companies that had supposedly been waiting to hire me, they weren't as eager as I'd made it sound at Thanksgiving. The interviews came, but the offers didn't. And just like that, the cracks in my perfect little world started to show. I told myself it was just a temporary thing, a minor setback. After all, I was a Carleton graduate. I had ambition. It wasn't supposed to be this hard, but weeks turned into months, and my confidence started to crack. I was still living at home, still listening to my parents sign over bills, still watching as Deborah's money covered things that I couldn't. It was humiliating, and I hated every second of it. I would scroll through job listings late at night, my stomach twisting every time I saw the same rejection emails sitting in my inbox. I started making excuses when friends asked what I was doing. I'm just taking some time to find the right fit. I have a few opportunities lined up, just weighing my options. But the truth was, I was getting desperate. And then one night, I overheard something that nearly broke me. Mom was talking on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low but not low enough. I just don't know what we would do without Deborah. She's been such a blessing, always looking out for us. We're lucky to have one responsible daughter. I stood there, frozen, as the words settled in my stomach like stones. One responsible daughter. Not me, her. It didn't matter that I had spent my whole life being their favorite. It didn't matter that I had gone to a better school than Deborah, that I was supposed to be the successful one. None of it mattered. Because in the end, money was what mattered, and Deborah had it. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath my skin, hot and sharp. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake my mother and remind her of everything I had been to them. I was the one they had spent their lives doting on. I was the one they had given everything to. And yet now, they spoke about her like she was their savior, like I was nothing. I stormed back to my room, slamming the door behind me. I wanted to throw something, to break something, to do anything to make the frustration inside me stop. Instead, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Deborah's name. I stared at it for a long time. I could text her. I could ask for help. She had the money. She could fix this. But the thought made my stomach churn. I didn't want to ask for help. I wanted what was mine. The problem was, I wasn't sure I had anything left. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I was barely holding it together. I told myself I'd land something soon, that I just had to be patient. But my bank account was draining faster than I could handle. My parents had started hinting about me contributing to bills, little comments here and there about how Deborah was doing so much. And it would be nice if you could pitch in, too. As if I wasn't trying, as if I wasn't struggling, I walked into Thanksgiving dinner with a smile plastered on my face, determined to act like nothing was wrong. But Deborah, she was smug. I could see it in the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence in her posture. She wasn't showing off, she never did, but something about her made my skin crawl. Because she wasn't just Deborah anymore. She was the successful one, the rich one, and everyone at that table knew it. Then, Mom had to open her mouth. Deborah stepped in and arranged for this wonderful catered meal. Wasn't that thoughtful? I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Of course she had. Everyone nodded, smiling, looking at her like she was some kind of saint. I felt something inside me snap. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to prove that she wasn't special, that she wasn't better than me. So I excused myself, walked down the hall, and slipped into her old bedroom. Her laptop was sitting there, screen glowing, open, unlocked. And the second I saw it, the second I realized I had access to everything, I knew what I was going to do. I was going to expose her. Because if she was so successful, so generous, then surely she wouldn't mind if everyone saw just how much money she had. I grabbed the laptop and marched back into the dining room, my heart pounding. Everyone turned to look at me as I placed it down on the table, spinning it around so they could all see. Let's find out just how well Deborah's really doing. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mom's face twisted in confusion. Amanda, what are you doing? I ignored her. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop. I clicked open her banking app. The number was right there, and then I saw it. And the world around me seemed to tilt. $10 million. 10 million. The silence was deafening. Mom gasped. Dad's mouth fell open. Someone's fork clattered against their plate. And me? I felt sick. My head spun as I tried to process what I was looking at. $10 million? How? Deborah? The girl who had always been in my shadow? The girl who had always been second place? My voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the ringing in my ears. 10 million? And just like that, the illusion shattered. I had spent my whole life believing that I was the better one, the one who had everything, the one who mattered. But it had never been true. Not really. And now? Now I was the one sitting in silence. Now I was the one who had nothing. Now I was nobody. And for the first time in my entire life, I had no idea what to do. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. 10 million. 10 million. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. This was Deborah, the quiet one, the one who had always been just there, like background noise in my life. And yet, I was staring at proof that she had more money than I had ever dreamed of. I heard my mother's voice, sharp and unsteady. There must be some mistake. Deborah's expression didn't change. She just closed the laptop with slow, deliberate movements, like she had all the time in the world. There's no mistake. Her voice was calm, unshaken. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry, my hands trembling. How? The word barely scraped past my lips. Deborah tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle she had already solved. Investing, she said simply. I started years ago, learned the market, took some risks, and it paid off. Investing. The word felt foreign, empty, meaningless. My mind scrambled for something, anything that would make this make sense. But you're just a... I stopped myself. Just a what? A nobody? A background character? She wasn't just anything anymore. And I had never been more aware of that than at this moment. Mom was the first to break through my spiraling thoughts. You've had this much money, and you let us struggle? Her voice cracked, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I turned to look at her, at my father, at the raw betrayal in their eyes, and for a brief, fleeting second, I felt relieved. Because finally, someone else was as shocked and blindsided as I was. Struggle? Deborah's voice was sharp. I send you thousands of dollars every month. I pay your bills, cover your property taxes, make sure Amanda doesn't starve while she figures her life out. Don't talk to me about struggle. Her words hit me like a slap. I felt my face burn, my pulse pounding in my ears. You think that makes you better than us? I snapped. Deborah turned to me, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw something in her eyes that I had never noticed before. Pity. I don't think I'm better than you, she said quietly. I just stopped needing your approval a long time ago. Something inside me snapped. You've been lying, I accused, my voice rising. You let me think you were just some boring office worker while you were secretly hoarding millions. You let Mom and Dad take out loans for my tuition when you could have just paid it off. Deborah let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. You mean the tuition for the private university you insisted on? The school you chose because it made you feel superior? The one you mocked me for not attending? I opened my mouth, then shut it again. Because she was right. And that just made me angrier. It's still family, I hissed. You should have helped more. I already helped more than I should have, she countered, her voice cool, measured. Mom's voice broke through the tension, sharp and pleading. If you have that much money, Deborah, why not help Amanda with her student loans? Why not give us more to make things easier? Deborah stared at her for a long moment. Then she laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that made my stomach turn. Of course, she said softly. Of course, it always comes back to Amanda. The words stung more than they should have, because she wasn't wrong, and I hated her for it. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. You're selfish, I spat. You just want to sit on your pile of money while the rest of us suffer. Deborah tilted her head, considering me. You don't get it, do you? She murmured. I crossed my arms, jaw tight. Get what? Her gaze was steady. I spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, she said, nodding toward our parents. I tried everything: good grades, competitions, scholarships, and nothing was ever enough, because you always came first. I opened my mouth to argue, but she wasn't done. And now? She exhaled, shaking her head. Now I have $10 million, and you still expect me to be the one responsible for cleaning up your mess. I hated her at that moment. I hated how calm she was, how unshaken, how she spoke like she had already won, and maybe she had. You're pathetic, I muttered. pushing back from the table. Mom gasped, Amanda! But I was already storming out, because I couldn't stand to sit there a second longer. Couldn't stand to see the shift in their faces as they looked at Deborah, not as the invisible older sister, not as the one they could ignore, but as the one who had power. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one in control anymore. I barely made it to my bedroom before the weight of it all came crashing down. 10 million. The number wouldn't leave my head. It was impossible. Deborah had always been boring, predictable, just someone there. She was supposed to be less than me, but she wasn't. She was better, richer, smarter. And worst of all, she had won. I collapsed onto my bed, staring at the ceiling, my breathing sharp and uneven. It wasn't fair. I had always been the one they cared about, the one they protected. I had been raised to believe that I was special. So how did I end up here? Broke, jobless, and now, completely humiliated. I squeezed my eyes shut. No, this wasn't over. I just needed to think. I needed a plan. I woke up with a headache and the bitter taste of last night still in my mouth. I didn't want to go downstairs. I didn't want to face them, but I had no choice. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Mom and Dad were already sitting at the table, whispering in hushed tones. They stopped the moment they saw me. I knew what they were thinking. They had spent years reassuring me, building me up, making sure I always felt like the most important person in the room. Now, they were looking at me like I was a burden. I swallowed hard and sat down. Silence stretched between us. Then Mom cleared her throat. Amanda, honey, maybe you should talk to your sister. I flinched. About what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Dad sighed. Your student loans, sweetheart. And, well, we're struggling with the house payments. We thought maybe what? I snapped. That she'll just give us money because you ask nicely? Mom gave me a look. She's your sister, Amanda. She's also selfish, I shot back. That wasn't true, and I knew it. But I was angry. Angry that they had turned to her instead of me. Angry that they were asking me to beg her for money. And angry because I knew Deborah wouldn't do it. Not anymore. I had burned that bridge the moment I tried to expose her at Thanksgiving. We're family, Dad said, rubbing his temples. She'll help if we explain how much we need it. I doubted that. Deborah had looked me in the eye and told me she was done. And she had meant it. Still, I had to try. Because the truth was, I had no other options. I spent the next hour pacing in my room, staring at my phone, dreading what I had to do. Every instinct screamed at me to not send the message, but I had no choice. Finally, I forced myself to type it out. Amanda, can we talk? I stared at the screen, waiting. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. Nothing. I gritted my teeth and tried again. Amanda, look, I know things got heated, but I just want to have a conversation. Please. Still nothing. She had seen it. I knew she had. She was ignoring me. My face burned as I threw my phone onto the bed. This was her revenge, wasn't it? She wanted me to feel powerless, and it was working. But I wasn't giving up that easily. I didn't text her again. I went straight to her apartment. It took everything in me to show up at her door. When she finally opened it, she looked annoyed, like I was wasting her time. What do you want, Amanda? She asked, arms crossed. I forced a smile. I just want to talk. We did talk, she said flatly. You made your opinion very clear. I swallowed my pride and softened my voice. I was upset, I admitted. I wasn't thinking. She didn't say anything, just stared at me like she was waiting. So I said it. I need help, Deborah. She didn't react. Help? She repeated. With my loans, I said quickly. And Mom and Dad, too. They're struggling with the house. And I just thought, you thought what? She cut in. That I'd swoop in and fix it for you? I flinched. I'm just asking for a little support, I said, my voice tighter now. She laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a tired one. A little support? She repeated. Amanda, I've been supporting you for years. You just never noticed. I clenched my jaw. So that's it? I snapped. You're just going to abandon your family? Her eyes darkened. I was never part of this family, she said quietly. Not the way you were. I hated how that made my chest tighten. Because she was right. She had always been second place, and I had never cared. Not until it started affecting me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Look, I tried again. You have more than enough money. Helping us wouldn't even affect you. She studied me for a long moment. Then she shook her head. It's not about the money, she said. Then what is it? I snapped. Her gaze was cold. It's about the fact that you only see me as useful when you need something. I felt that, like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because what could I say? She was right. She sighed. I'm done, Amanda. She shut the door in my face. And just like that, I had nothing. I stood there, frozen, staring at the closed door. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Deborah had always been boring, predictable, someone who never fought back. She was the kind of person you could push aside, ignore, and she'd just take it. But not anymore. She had shut the door in my face like I was nothing. And maybe, to her, I was nothing now. The realization hit me hard. I had spent my whole life knowing that I was the one who mattered. That I was special. That, no matter what, I would always be the one my parents put first. And maybe I still was. But being their favorite didn't mean anything when the person they had ignored was the only one who could save us. And she had walked away. I felt something burning in my chest. A mix of anger, humiliation, and though I hated to admit it, fear. Because, without Deborah, I had no one left to fix this. When I got home, Mom and Dad were waiting. I didn't have to say anything. They could tell. She said no. It wasn't a question. I just nodded, dropping onto the couch, feeling completely empty. Mom exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. Dad muttered something under his breath, rubbing his temples. No one spoke for a long time, because what was there to say? They had spent years treating Deborah like an afterthought, like a safety net they never actually invested in. And now, when we finally needed her, when I finally needed her, she had done the one thing none of us expected. She had put herself first. And we couldn't do anything about it. The next few weeks were hell. I still hadn't found a job, and now the house bills were piling up. Mom and Dad started fighting more, their arguments always circling back to the same thing. Money. Me. Deborah. I heard Mom on the phone one night, her voice strained and desperate. I don't understand, Jennifer. She has the money. Why won't she just help? A pause. The quieter. What do you mean? I should have treated her better. I turned and left before I could hear the rest, because I already knew the answer. I didn't try to call Deborah again. I wanted to. I wanted to scream at her, guilt trip her, make her care. But she didn't. And deep down, I knew she never would. She had let go of us. She had let go of me. One night, in a moment of weakness, I pulled out my phone and typed a message. Amanda, you really don't care at all, do you? I stared at it for a long time. Then, finally, I hit send. She saw it, didn't reply, didn't even acknowledge it, and that hurt more than anything. Not the money, not the rejection, but the fact that she was completely done with me. That I could reach out, again and again, and she wouldn't even spare me a response. I had lost her, and I had no one to blame but myself. Deborah moved out of state a few months later. She didn't tell us. I only found out when I went to her old apartment to try one last time, and the landlord told me she had left, paid everything up front, didn't leave a forwarding address. It was over. Mom cried the day she realized Deborah wasn't coming back. Dad was quieter, more resigned. Me? I felt like I was grieving someone who was still alive, because Deborah was alive. She just wasn't ours anymore. She had escaped, and I was still here, broke, stuck, and finally realizing that I had done this to myself.